Okay, and welcome back, students who are taking financial accounting, and we are working on the Chapter 2 problems, Group B. And in the last video, we were working on the very last problem for this chapter, which was problem 42. And I thought I'd be able to do it in one video, but obviously I'm doing it in two videos. So let's just move on from here. Let's see, we did A and we did B, so now we're on C. Okay. It says here the company accountant recorded a payment, a $1,200 payment of rent by debiting rent expense for $12,000. So he debited rent expense for $12,000 and credited cash for $12,000. Okay, but it's supposed to be $1,200. Right? So what's the correct entry supposed to look like? Okay, well, you know, I'm paying rent for $1,200 in cash, so am I affecting cash? Yes. Okay, is my cash increasing or decreasing? It's decreasing because I'm paying out the $1,200. So since cash is an asset and we decrease our assets on the credit side, I'm going to credit my cash for $1,200 and I debit something else, which is rent expense, for $1,200. Okay, now, I mean, we use the right accounts. The only thing that's wrong is we use the wrong amounts. Okay, so if we had credit cash for $12,000 and it's supposed to be $1,200, the difference between the two is $10,800. Okay, but now here's the thing. Let me erase this and visually put this, right? So if this is zero, okay, zero in cash, and I had made it $12,000 here, right? I decreased my cash by $12,000, but my cash was only supposed to be here at $1,200. Well, in order to make the correcting entry, since this is a credit, okay, I have to actually debit it to get back up to the $1,200. Okay, so I have my debit to cash for $10,800 and a credit to rent expense for $10,800. Remember, when my original entry was a credit, all right, but it's way too much. So in order to lessen it, reduce it, I have to debit, which is going in the opposite direction, in order to bring it up to the credit here of $1,200. Okay, so let's take a look at that in the T accounts. Maybe it looks a little bit easier to understand there. So here's my cash, and here's my rent expense. Okay, and I had a credit of $12,000. Whoops, let me erase that. I had a credit of $12,000 and a debit of $12,000. But the issue here is that I'm only supposed to have a balance of $1,200, okay, in both of those accounts. $1,200 on the credit side for cash and $1,200 on the debit side for rent expense. Well, remember, when we're doing, when we're figuring out the balance, we take our debits less our credits, and whichever one's greater, okay? And we already know that the amount is $10,800. But if I put the $10,800 on the credit side, I'd be adding, $10,000 to $12,000. So obviously that's not right. I have to put the $10,800 on the debit side. Okay. So when I'm doing it that way, I have 12,000 less 10,800, which gives me the balance of $1,200. And since the 12,000 is a credit, okay, that's greater than this here debit, which gives me a credit of 1,200, which is what I need. So my entry has to be a debit to cash for 10,800, and obviously that means debits have to equal credits, so I have to credit my rent expense for 10,800, and so that's how I arrive at my journal entry. T accounts, me personally, this is what went through my mind, okay? But remember, T accounts are a tool to be used, and this is a good example of just using that tool in order to be able to figure out what you need to do. A lot of accountants, when they have to make correcting entries, will use the T accounts in order to be able to figure things out, because they're generally a lot more complicated than this, especially when you get into like discounts and returns and allowances and so on and so forth. It just makes it so much easier to be able to see and understand what you're doing when you use the T accounts. Okay, so that's why I'm showing you in this, in these videos as another alternative to how to solve the problem. Okay, so now it says, let's see if we're overstated, understated, or unchanged. Well, obviously we're using, rent expense. Okay, so if my expense was 12,000, and I'm just going to make up a number for my revenue, let's call it 15,000. Okay, less my 12,000 for an expense, that means I'd have a profit of $3,000. But I know that, that's the wrong amount. So let's plug the numbers back in and say we have 15,000 for our revenue, but it's only supposed to be 1,200 for our expense. Okay, so that means I have 008, $13,800 of profit. Is my profit understated or overstated? Well, obviously my profit is understated because I need to have a lot more than what I had. I have a lot more than, I have a lot less than what I actually should have. Okay, so by putting in the wrong amount, I only have 3,000, but it's not enough. By putting in the right amount, it should be 13,000. So my net income is understated. Okay. All right, so that's that one. Okay, and now let's do the last one here. Yeah, the joys of erasing. And while I'm erasing, remember, you can watch the videos again. I keep saying it. I know a lot more people are watching these videos, which is good. We're not wasting our time making them. But again, if you don't understand it, feel free to speak with an instructor. Okay, so last one. In recording an $825 payment on account, accounts receivable was debited. Debited accounts receivable for $825, and cash was credited. Okay, so we're receiving a payment on account. Okay, so ask when making a journal entry, the first thing they ask yourself is, am I affecting cash? Okay, and the answer is yes. All right, I'm receiving 825. Okay, cash is an asset. We increase our assets on the debit side, so I have a debit to cash for 825, and I have to credit something else. So I'm going to credit, and I know it's on account, so I know I'm crediting my accounts receivable for 825. So that's the entry. Let's see here. That's the entry that I'm supposed to have. Let me think about this. In recording an $825 payment on account, okay. In recording an $825 payment on account. Payment on account. All right, yep. Take some thinking, okay? It's saying that in recording an $825 payment on account. Boy, this one's a tough one, even for me. As you can see, I'm struggling with this. In recording an $825 payment on account. So we're making the payment, so that would be an accounts payable. And so we recorded it as a debit to accounts receivable for $825 and a credit to cash for $825. Okay, because it's a payment, we should be paying an accounts payable. All right. So what should have the entry have been? Okay, well, I'm going to, the thing that I'm going to ask myself is, am I affecting cash? And the answer is yes. Why? Because I'm paying cash out because it's a payment of $825. Okay, so cash is an asset, and I decrease my assets on the credit side. So I have a credit to cash for $825, but because we're making the payment, I'm going to debit accounts payable for the $825. Okay, so that's what my correct entry should be. All right, now my cash is okay. The issue is, I debited accounts receivable, and I should have debited accounts payable. Okay, well, to correct that entry, okay, that means, remember, we're correcting this entry here. Okay, well, to get rid of the accounts payable, that means I need to credit the accounts. I need to get rid of the accounts receivable. In order to get rid of the accounts receivable, I need to credit the accounts receivable for $825, and that means I need to debit the accounts payable for $825, and that's my correcting entry. My cash is going to stay the same. Okay, I don't need to mess around with my cash because it's $825. The issue is of my having put it into accounts receivable when it should have been in accounts payable. Well, if I put it into accounts receivable as a debit, to reverse that as a credit, and that's why I credit it. And if I credit accounts receivable, I debit something else. Well, that debit has to be the accounts payable, which is what I need right there. Okay. To look at it from a different perspective, and this again is where the T accounts come into play, and accounts payable here. Okay, so my original entry was for a debit to accounts receivable for $825 and a credit to cash for $825. Okay, now what I'm supposed to have is I'm supposed to have a credit to cash for $825 and a debit to my accounts payable for $825. All right. My cash is correct. Okay. So I don't need to mess with, the cash doesn't have to, I don't have to use that as part of my journal entry, my correcting journal entry. But my accounts receivable, it's supposed to have a zero balance. Okay. Well, it doesn't. It has a debit for $825. That means I need to credit $825. So the debit less the credit would give me a zero balance. And obviously I have nothing in my accounts payable, so I have to put the $825 on the debit side in order to get the balance at $825 in the journal entry. Okay, so that's how I arrive at the debit for $825 and the credit for $825. Okay. Now this word payment here is what threw me, okay? And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about it, because what's the payment? I'm making a payment or am I receiving a payment, okay? And so that's why you saw me stuttering and wondering, well, what's going on here? Now, obviously, since I'm dealing with receivables, payables, and cash, none of those are income statement accounts, so my profit or loss stays unchanged for that particular entry. But as you can see, even something just like this, all right, does not, I'll struggle with it too. And you just saw me struggling with, one of those situations. And that's a good thing, because don't feel like, like you don't get it, okay? Even people who have 30 years of experience sometimes don't get it, depending upon how it's presented. But my experience is causing me to really, really, really think about what this is. And to be honest with you, I didn't look at the solution. Okay, I have not looked at the solution here for these problems. I use the solutions like in the previous problems, exercises 40 and 41, because I don't want to be bouncing back between slides, all right, between the PowerPoint slides. But for this particular problem, I'm not looking at the solutions. I'm just working them through. And, once I have it worked through, then I'm going to glance at the solution to see what it is. So you've seen an actual example of me actually having to struggle a little bit with the way the information is presented to me and the way I process it in my mind in order to be able to arrive at the correct answer. Okay, and it's all determined by this word payment right here. Okay, so with that said, we're done with the problems for chapter 2, and if you have any questions, telephone and speak with an instructor. And also, you might want to watch the Matt Fisher videos, that are on YouTube. I mean, they're not part of the subject matter, but I'm going to put those up on the student community also. Right? Well, then we'll see you in for the theory videos for chapter number 3.